We're going to have two panels this morning. One is going to be a macro panel, which discusses economic freedom in a regional, national, and even international setting. And then we're going to discuss the Puerto Rico model in some detail in the second panel. I very much second Daniel Garza's remarks, but I'd like to emphasize something that is not talked about enough in making the case for economic freedom: the moral case. If you take all of the data, whether it's from Freedom Watch, the Human Rights Group, the Heritage Foundation survey, Americans for Tax Reform, the World Bank, Transparency International, if you take all of these statistics and numbers, what they tell you is economic freedom not only allows nations to be more prosperous, it extends life expectancy, it promotes environmental protection because only rich countries truly have the resources to maintain and improve their environment over a sustained period of time, and it also leads to more democracy, more representative government, and more freedom. Now, this is a bumpy road. China is on a very long journey, but I suspect over time its economic freedoms are going to translate into citizen freedoms and citizen participation. What we are here to discuss is not just the importance of economic freedom, but to the extent to which it is an essential component of all of the good things that we want in life, and also to discuss how best to promote it and how best to preserve it. Because I'm reminded of what Lech Walesa, who was just in the news because he met with Mitt Romney in Poland, what Lech Walesa told me recently after he'd come, 20 years ago when he first came to America, I met with him, and I asked him, because he had just finished touring America for 6 weeks, and I said, "What have you learned about America?" And he said all of the good things that people would expect one to say, that a visitor would say. And I said, "Well, tell us something that we should be concerned about, or that you think is missing in America, or that you don't like about America." And he said, "There's one thing that bothers me." He said, "You have never been conquered. You have never lost your freedom. You've never had an invading army come in, occupy your soil, and seize your freedoms. To that extent, you have become complacent. You are like the frog in the pot of water on the stove. And gradually governments, your own governments, state, local, and federal, have turned up the heat. And it's 1 degree at a time. And as you know, the frog sitting in the water, as long as the increase in temperature is gradual, the frog doesn't notice. But then the temperature rises and rises. By the time the frog realizes it's too late, he's cooked. Can't get out of the pot." Lech Walesa told us, "I worry that is the United States of America, that you are losing your economic freedom and your personal freedoms by inches. And to the extent that you do that, you're losing something most precious to you, but also most precious to the world, because you're such a symbol and such a model that so much of the rest of the world wants to follow. So please don't lose that."
So the Heritage Foundation has been around since 1973. We got started right after the Watergate scandal, Nixon. Very few people gave the Heritage Foundation an opportunity or a shot because at the time they thought a think tank with a conservative tilt had no chance of ever surviving. Of course, we proved them wrong. We have been around ever since then, and along the way, we've made a number of friends, including Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan embraced a lot of the work and research that we've done. We have also made friends with folks who may not always see eye to eye with us. In fact, we worked with Bill Clinton in 1996 to enact welfare reform. And our work and research has been cited by not only by the media but also by legislatures, and we aim to do that. We aim to influence public policy. So it's a real calling for me to be in a place that is advocating for the things that I think make this country exceptional. And one of those things, I think, has to be economic freedom. I truly believe that the next few chapters of our country's history are going to be in large part influenced by how Hispanics and Latinos look at or come to this crossroad that we're in right now, which either we're going to be going on a path of a more centralized, more expensive, more intrusive government, not unlike Europe, or if we're going to maintain and embrace I think what has made this country exceptional, which is that we've allowed for the innovation and the ingenuity that has created things like the iPhone and other things that we enjoy so well. And the economic freedom that I think many of us who came to this country looking for. No, that's the case for me from Mexico. So, and then the last thing I just want to mention is the Index of Economic Freedom, which is a tool that looks at all these things that Daniel and John were just talking about. We've already touched on them, so I don't want to dwell too much. But it's not a secret formula. There are specific steps that a country can take to get out of poverty. Korea is a great example. 56 years ago, as a country, very limited resources, a lot of people living in poverty, and it's a testament to the fact that economic freedom does raise the quality of life, does, as John was just mentioning, the environment. So it's a great index. It's a great thing that we put out. What I will say is that the United States fell a couple spots last year. We're now number 10 behind Canada. So I think that this discussion that we're having right now is very timely as we think about the size and scope of the government.
Canada is now rated higher in economic freedom on the Heritage Wall Street Journal Index than the United States. It is no coincidence that in the newspaper headlines just a few days ago, we learned that Canadians now have a greater per capita wealth than the United States. The first time that has ever happened. That should give us pause. The changes in the country that are causing us to lose ground to Canada and perhaps other countries very soon. And those changes may be like the frog in the water, where the temperature is turned up 1 degree at a time. I'd like to turn the conversation a little bit directly towards Hispanics in the United States. According to the HispanicPost.com, 8 out of 10 Hispanics in the United States work in the private sector. In fact, looking across ethnic groups, Hispanics are less likely than other ethnic groups to work for the government, state or local or federal. The growth in Hispanic business in the first decade of this century was dramatic. Between 2002 and 2008, the number of Hispanic businesses grew by 42%. There are now over 3 million Hispanic businesses in the United States. The fastest growing segment of all business in the United States is female-headed Latina businesses, which, because of the Hispanic emphasis on family, are often very easy to start because they can be home-based, they can employ family members first, an extended family, and they often become much bigger, Goya Foods being a classic example. So, given the importance of small business in the Hispanic economic story in the United States, and given the entrepreneurial spirit that Hispanics show when there is economic freedom, I'd like to ask Daniel and Israel, to what extent have recent changes in the United States, how will they directly impact the future of Hispanics in America?
I think the most worrisome trend is the trend towards poverty in Hispanic America. 2009, there was 5.3 million Hispanic children living under poverty. Today, it's 6.1. In sheer numbers, we have passed the white population in poverty of children. 1 out of every 4, 25% of Hispanic Americans live under the poverty level. Voy a hacer el comentario en español, el resto de esto, porque yo creo que es importante, especialmente para nuestras comunidades de fe que están aquí. La pobreza que ahora existe en los Estados Unidos ha aumentado. Nuestros niños ahora están viviendo más en pobreza que antes de ciertas medidas que se han tomado por parte del gobierno de subir lo que es el gasto público. Ahora, lo que quiero decir también, y que es netamente importante aquí, es de que lo que estamos haciendo, avanzando lo que es la libertad económica, no es tanto para que el rico o la persona que tenga riqueza mantenga más de su riqueza, porque es importante. Ellos tienen que generar oportunidades económicas para el resto del país. Lo estamos haciendo porque este es el sistema que genera más oportunidades económicas para esos los que están en pobreza, para sacar a esos los que están de abajo y para que puedan escalar lo que es en la escala económica. A eso es lo que nos preocupa más que cualquier otra cosa. Entonces, cuando las medidas y las políticas del gobierno están avanzando o están generando más pobreza, más dependencia sobre el gobierno, eso es preocupante para nuestra comunidad. Entonces hay que tener un diálogo honesto de qué son esas políticas que están causando un aumento en la pobreza. Y si es sostenerlos con más dependencia del gobierno, pues eso lo tenemos que rechazar. Mis padres vinieron a los Estados Unidos buscando la oportunidad. Ellos sabían que si ellos pudieran ser libres de gobierno, de regulación, de impuestos, de trabas que pone el gobierno, de sacar tanto permiso, tanta burocracia, de que ellos podían lograr el sueño americano aquí en los Estados Unidos. Mi padre llegó hasta el 4º grado y mi madre también. Vienen de Garza González, Nuevo León, México. Ellos vinieron en los 70s. A través de su sudor, eran campesinos que migraban de California a Nebraska, al estado de Washington. Ellos, después de 15, 20 años de duro trabajo, tomaron sus ahorros, lo invirtieron en un negocio. Y con esa inversión, ese riesgo de capital que hicieron, ellos pudieron entonces lograr el sueño americano.
Obviously, it's the dependence on government probably that worries me most about just what's happening. I think it's a very specific example I'm thinking of. The U.S. Department of Agriculture was recently in the news, and not for good reasons. It was uncovered that for a number of years now, it had actually been running advertising in big Hispanic media markets and using telenovelas to not only inform Hispanic and Latinos about government assistance, but also in the way they were doing it, it was making it acceptable and even enticing to be dependent on the government. And so when you look at that, and then you look at what Daniel was just mentioning, that some of the numbers I looked at, 1 out of 3 Hispanic children are living in poverty. You can see the connection in the trend that is worrisome, that Hispanics will start relying more on the government. And of course, as Thomas Jefferson once said, a government that gives you everything can take everything from you.
Many Hispanics who came to the United States come from countries where they know what the lack of freedom represents. They know what the lack of allowing people to achieve their potential can create. Instability, grinding poverty, a complete inability to rise up from where you are in society to a higher level. So Hispanics have an even more important story to tell because much of their heritage comes from countries where they appreciate the difference between freedom and authoritarianism. I would suggest that one barrier, I think, to Hispanic advance in the United States is some of the people who purport to speak for Hispanics. I call them the special interest mafia. These are people who I think realize their political power is enhanced to the extent that they ghettoize Hispanics into communities, prevent integration, prevent assimilation to some extent, and they emphasize things which are not of direct importance to most Hispanics in their daily lives and their family situations.
In my observation, growing up Latino in the state of Washington, in California, and other places, we are a people who are proud, noble, rich in culture and potential and promise. And then somewhere along the line, that becomes distorted. And you see that sometimes in the second and third generation where they make a decision whether they're going to strike out on their own or they're going to depend on somebody else. And I think that's the dividing line on the kind of community you're going to receive and the kind of society you're going to build. An entrepreneurial, risk-taking, proud community, or you're going to be one that is dependent, stifled by government. We haven't changed much through history. In governor's dinner yesterday, I mentioned, of course, one of my heroes is Emiliano Zapata, revolucionario mexicano. Tierra y libertad. He was fighting for the confiscated lands that were taken by the government. And so they support a politician who said that they were going to give them the lands back to the Indians. And Madero doesn't deliver the lands. And he meets with them again and he says, what happened? How come you didn't deliver on the promises? Well, you know, we got things to do. We got other priorities. And promises made, promises broken. And we see that today again. But when government taxes too much, it regulates too much, it takes too much because it makes false promises, then that's when we start to see the breakdown in society. Half of all Hispanic children today, born out of wedlock. Already, half of us are being born at a disadvantage where we don't have an optimum condition of a family, a mother and a father. And we know that they're more prone to drop out of high school, get involved in gangs, get involved in drugs, suicide. The numbers skyrocket. And so that's a concern.
Almost 50% of Hispanic students in high school in some of the major cities in our country, this is a study done by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, found that about half of Hispanics are not going to receive a high school diploma. So what does that mean in terms of the prospects for that individual who doesn't have a simple high school diploma in a more competitive workplace? So that's a staggering number, and when you think about how the left responds to that, well, what they will say in large part is, well, we need to spend more money on education. Of course, President Obama uses the word invest. You know, we need to invest more, and it's always very, very prominent the way he says that. And of course, of course, we do want to invest in education, but we also have to be smart about how we're investing in education. And what the left opposes are freedom. So the freedom to choose, for instance, where to send your children to school. That is a direct threat to the teacher unions. And so that freedom is constrained to the Hispanic population. We're seeing this right now in Louisiana, and we're seeing in other states. Washington, D.C. was having a debate about this, which is on school choice. And so I think that this is an important conversation we need to have. We need to talk about education because if Hispanics are going to be businessmen and work in politics, and we need to have an education. And if we're going to live out the American dream, we need to make sure that we encourage more and more Hispanics to finish school. And just as Daniel was saying, look, the government can't do it all. You can't put a price tag of a parent sitting down with their children to do homework. These are things that oftentimes are not discussed.
A good news story that I think is happening in Puerto Rico and something that people can be proud of is this. Everyone knows that the world is becoming more economically integrated, and Puerto Rico has opened itself up to the world increasingly. I'm told that over 90% of the classified ads in either the newspapers here or on the internet say the job requires a working knowledge of English. And I know that there has been some resistance in some quarters in Puerto Rico in previous generations to the full integration of English into the Puerto Rican culture. I think that is changing. We see the new schools that the governor is opening. Apparently parents are lining up in droves to try to go to these schools, not just because English is more integrated into the curriculum, but also the curriculum now includes character counts education, values, morals, extending the lessons that people should learn or do learn in the family structure to the school, respect for others, honesty, integrity. All of that is to the good. And I think one of the things Puerto Rico can teach the mainland is we have a lot of states in the mainland that still follow a failed bilingual education model, which basically tries to bring people up in two languages at the same time, and often they end up learning neither language very well.
One of the examples I mentioned, which was the 1986 Welfare Reform Act, at the time, conservatives were vilified because they were saying, how could you possibly cut food stamps and government assistance? You are going to put people into poverty. I mean, this is what the attacks were like. And what we actually saw is that because the government was requiring people to be looking for work, there were work requirements in that 1996 Welfare Reform Act, you actually saw a decrease of people on government assistance because you saw that actually as people had work, they wouldn't be depending on government, they could provide for their families. Unfortunately, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw the Obama administration gut that element, that important element from the 1996 Reform Act. Basically, the Department of Health and Human Services is giving the states permission to no longer require people to be looking for work to receive government assistance. It's facts like that, compelling facts like that, I think that are going to be important as we take this this narrative of why economic freedom and not government dependence actually reduces poverty.
Why are there not more Hispanic wealthy people who donate and give back to the community? It's a good starting point for a question. But I would flip the question over. The best way to increase Hispanic philanthropy is to have more rich Hispanics. And the best way to have more rich Hispanics is to provide the economic opportunity that so many people who came to this country for that opportunity have benefited from and are rising through the income ladder. One of the things you see in California, as Hispanics climb in terms of per capita income, they become much more involved in their community, they become much more philanthropic, they become homeowners, they become much more invested in their community's future. So yes, it's a good question, but the easiest way to make that happen is to create economic conditions that allow people to become rich enough so they can become philanthropic.
I think one of the proposals right now is to tax the rich. Sounds great, because we're not rich. So that means some other guy's going to get it. Unfortunately, when you look at the details, what happens is that, of course, those who are making $250,000 and over, those who own small businesses are going to be taxed. But the more important point here is, when you tax the rich, let's say the wealthy, they're going to stay wealthy. They're going to stay rich. They're going to pass on the cost to the consumer. They're going to pass on the cost to the public. They're going to invest less. Where we should be focused is for those wealthy Hispanics, the few that exist, to make wise investments, to start up new businesses, to launch new endeavors, to innovate, to create, to give them the freedom to create new economic opportunities so we can provide jobs, growth, prosperity in our Hispanic communities.
The Heritage Foundation, I know, has done many studies on this, so have other groups. What I would emphasize, though, is we're seeing a very troubling shift, just like Ms. Del Villar mentioned about food stamps. Welfare is at least viewed, in theory, as temporary. There's a 5-year limit, even though the work requirements has been watered down, as Mr. Ortega says. What we're seeing now is an explosion of people applying for Social Security disability. Now, some of them certainly are fully qualified for that disability payment. But once you get certified as disabled by Social Security, you are disabled forever. It's almost impossible to remove you from the rolls. That is a form of dependency that is particularly insidious, because when you get people who are 45 or 50 years of age signing up for Social Security disability, some of that is chronic, some of that goes away, but the disability payments almost never get taken away. So while we should promote welfare to work, and I would refer you to Wisconsin and other examples, we need to really look carefully at whether or not too many people who are not fully deserving are signing up to the disability rolls.